This is question 3, and the question is, what kind of institution might distribute your media product and why? So part of this task was to do research to find an appropriate institution to distribute your film. And when I was looking for an institution, I wanted to make sure that it was highly respected and that it was highly regarded, so the film would get more publicity and the film would overall be more successful. So when I was filming the opening sequence, I had to take a lot of things in mind, and I did a lot of research on opening sequence and seeing the kind of similarities between each of them and the kind of cinematography techniques that each of them use to give it that cinematic, expensive look. And I think I successfully incorporated the majority of these effects. For example, one of them was to use an expensive camera, and what I did was I got a DSLR, and by doing that I could use a shallow depth of field, which gives a really nice blur effect when you can bring objects into focus and blur the background, and it just overall gives that more expensive look that people associate more with cinemas rather than home cameras. Also, I wanted to make sure that I used big props that would increase my production value. For example, I used a sports car, Porsche, and that in itself makes it look like the budget is much higher than it actually is, because there's an expensive car, and I also used a real gun. So all of these things added together allow for a higher production value and overall give the film a more authentic cinematic look. I also filmed the majority of the film inside in a relatively expensive looking room, and I think that added to the effect also. So when looking at different institutions, one of the ones that really caught my attention was Universal, because they're so highly regarded and so well known that I think it'll be really beneficial for a film to be taken on by them and distributed by them, because obviously it's going to get a much better publicity than, for example, a smaller studio like Big Talk. And I think that by keeping the camera shots looking professional and by having really good lighting and by doing all these things like using props and framing each shot correctly and having a proper storyboard, which I did, I think that overall allowed for the film to look a lot better and to kind of move away from that student look. And I think because of that, a institution like Universal will be far more likely to take this kind of film on, especially as in Universal are known to do films such as action films and horror films. Some examples being Apollo 13, The Mummy, The Island, just films like this that have that kind of mysterious horror thriller kind of mystery kind of theme to them. Universal is known for their huge presence within the film industry, and I think that's the main reason why it will be so effective to have my film partnered with them, especially as the film really follows their codes and conventions and their ideology and what they believe in. They're more focused on the mainstream consumer rather than going into more indie films. They're not as focused on story, they're more focused on actors and sets. And I think that Universal will be a good institution for my film to partner with, especially as I paid really close attention to making the set very elaborate and using the correct camera angles and camera shots and using good lighting, because all of this adds up to what most of Universal films are at the core, what they're about, which is ultimately appealing to a very wide audience. And one of the things I had to keep in mind was to keep the film relatively safe. If not, a institution like Universal would definitely not pick it up because they don't want to take risks. So I kept that in mind, and this is a mainstream twist on a indie film. If that makes sense, because the kind of themes and the conventions that my particular film uses, as in the storyline is reversed and it kind of pieces together as a film goes on, isn't too common with a big institution like Universal, as it's quite risky. But the way I filmed was to make sure that everything makes sense and that the story was intriguing enough for an institution like Universal to be interested. So at the beginning of my film there's a little animation that kind of shows the institutions that I used in the film, and on it it says Aslan Ertan Productions, which is obviously me, and then next to that is Universal Pictures. So Universal have signed, and I think that the film is suitable for Universal to sign. And also the exhibition, so it will come to all cinemas in the area first and then move out from there, and then it will come to DVD, digital download, etc. Netflix, Love Film, things like this that promote convergence.